now that I've discussed my worst films of the year, it's time to reward myself by talking about my favorite films of the year. Now, before we get into this, please keep in mind, I did not get to see any of the indie darlings that came out late in the year. I've heard nothing but great things about Promising Young Woman and The Father and Saint Maud and all these other films that came out, and I just never had the time to really sit down and watch them. I do apologize for this. This was not a great year in general. So, the movies on this list are just the best movies that I saw personally. So, please don't expect an Oscar list. In fact, I can only think of maybe 3 movies on this list that would even qualify for Oscars. That being said, let's keep an open mind and dive into my favorite films of the year. Coming in at number 10 is Birds of Prey. And I've already lost you, haven't I? Now, let me just clarify. I don't read Birds of Prey comics. I know several people are going to scream blasphemy when they see this, because apparently this didn't really follow it very well, from what I've heard. But because I'm not a fan of the comics and don't really follow them, I'm just judging this as a film. As a film, Birds of Prey is unbelievably entertaining from start to finish. The cinematography is beautiful. I love Kathy Yann's direction. The action choreography is some of the best I have seen in any comic book movie. And the performances, for the most part, are pretty damn good. Loved Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. Loved Journey Smollett as Black Canary. And as we all know, Mary Elizabeth Winstead can do no wrong, as long as she's not in a horror film. Truth be told, her character Huntress was probably my favorite thing in the movie. She had the best backstory. I loved the comedy with her not being able to get a word in, and how she has constant anger issues. I have anger issues myself, so I found her outbursts to be incredibly funny because they felt so genuine and in the moment. I also loved how much fun Ewan McGregor was clearly having as the villain. Roman Sionis is not a complex villain at all, but I love how the movie actually goes out of its way to make this a joke. He's a character who thinks he's deep and complex, but at the end of the day, he's just another asshole. The movie even has Harley calling him out on this, and I loved that. I found it clever how the movie took this everyday villain trope and made fun of itself. It's very self-aware, which works in its favor. Am I saying this movie's perfect? No. It has pacing issues. Renee Montoya didn't really do it for me. I would have much preferred if she had been switched out for someone like, say, Batgirl. Victor Zsasz was a massive letdown in this film, especially when you consider that he was one of the best characters on the show Gotham. It's sad when such a disjointed show can do a character more justice than a big-budget Hollywood movie can. I'm just saying. But aside from those few issues, Birds of Prey was an absolute blast, and you know what? I'm glad it exists. Coming in at number 9 for me is Sonic the Hedgehog. Yes, Sonic the Hedgehog. It says a lot about 2020 when I liked a video game movie more than any comic book movie released this year. Yeah. It felt so good for them to finally get a video game movie right, and truth be told, I thought this movie was gonna blow. I was genuinely shocked watching this in the theater, just how funny, sweet, and charming it was. And that's something that most video game adaptations, and even many comic book adaptations, miss out on. Charm. Now, let's be real. Would I have loved to see an animated movie based more off the Sonic Sat AM cartoon? Yes, absolutely. I would have loved to see that. However, considering how many movies with this film's formula have failed in the past, it was shocking to see how well it was done here. A lot of this has to do with the chemistry with James Marsden and Ben Schwartz, which is the very heart of the film. Ben Schwartz was perfect as the voice of Sonic. They really do a lot to get you invested in his character. Yes, there's 1 or 2 jokes that fall flat because it's a kid's movie, so there's gonna be some juvenile humor. But considering I went into this thinking that the entire movie would be juvenile humor, those 1 or 2 moments really didn't bother me. Jim Carrey just steals the show as Robotnik, and he honestly hasn't been this funny in years. I can't wait to see him play the role again. Please bring on the sequel, and I better see my boy Knuckles at some point. At number 8 for me is Onward. Now, this movie is an interesting situation for me because when I first watched it, I just thought it was okay. It was an imaginative, creative, and fun little movie about 2 brothers on a road trip trying to resurrect their father for a day. It was perfectly fine, but it didn't really resonate with me the first time I saw it. However, this movie over the past few months has begun to hit me a lot harder. And to understand why, I gotta get a little personal here, so please bear with me for a moment. I have been unbelievably homesick. I am in Florida. My entire family is located in New York and Pennsylvania. Because of this pandemic, I couldn't go home for the holidays like I do every year. So I've been really missing my family a lot over the past few months. And I didn't even realize how much I missed them until I watched this movie again. The relationship between the two brothers had me missing my brothers. The backstory regarding the older brother and his father, and that touching scene at the end of the film, that had me missing my dad a lot. So the more I watch this movie, the more of an emotional effect it has on me because of how much I miss my family. The movie is great. It has that imagination that I expect from Disney. It has that beautiful animation. I think if you have a close relationship with your family, though, or if you're missing a member of your family who isn't around you, this movie will hit hard for you. At number 7 is yet another film that I expected to hate, but walked out of pleasantly surprised with how much I loved it. If you've kept up with my recent reviews, you've probably guessed that it's Underwater. Underwater was a throwback to several horror sci-fi pictures, and one that works by giving us characters to care about, a genuinely thrilling setup, and some superb effects. The actors, even Kristen Stewart, all do wonderfully here. I know a lot of people like to give Kristen Stewart shit for Twilight, but if you see her in anything outside of Twilight, she is not a bad actress. This movie was no exception. I loved how her character wasn't the strong-looking, typical heroine you'd see in most media, and yet she was the most badass character in the movie. Side performances from Jessica Henwick and Vincent Cassel are excellent. As I said in my review, I don't think the look of the monsters in the film are really anything to write home about, but I did love the way they were utilized. How the film actually sets up suspense and tension before the monsters are used. So yeah, I really wasn't expecting to love this film as much as I did, but it only gets better the more I watch it. At number 6 for me is Freaky, a movie that took the Freaky Friday formula and turned it into a slasher comedy. Katherine Newton was wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what she does in her career down the line. Vince Vaughn steals this movie. He absolutely steals this movie, playing the killer who swaps bodies with a teenage girl. So if you ever wanted to watch Vince Vaughn act like a teenage girl, trust me, it's even funnier than you can imagine. I'm dead serious when I say Vaughn hasn't been this funny since Wedding Crashers. While I feel that Freaky lacks the emotional core of Happy Death Day, it does still manage to get some emotional moments in there, and still manages to be an incredibly fun film for what it is. I really hope Christopher Landon does more films like this down the line, because this really seems to be his niche. Coming at number 5 for me is Soul. I think it's getting a bit cliche to say that Disney and Pixar have done it again every year, but can't help it, they still produce great content, and Soul is no exception. The imagination of this film is wonderful. Jamie Foxx is perfect as this character who learns to appreciate the good things in his life. I loved Tina Fey as this character who needs to be convinced to actually live a life. The way that this film actually conveys the harsh realities of existence I thought was beautifully handled. I adored the animation, especially the backgrounds of New York City. If I have any gripes with this film, I thought the last 2 minutes were unnecessary. I'm not gonna say what happens, because I don't want to spoil anything, but I felt like had it ended before those last 2 minutes, the movie would have hit a lot harder emotionally. But again, that's the only problem I had, and it in no way ruins this film or the experience of it. If you're ever feeling down about life and you want to see a movie that really will make you appreciate the life you've had, this is the movie for you. Coming at number 4 for me is Bad Boys for Life. Now, just to clarify, I'm not a huge fan of the Bad Boys movies. The thing that really makes them enjoyable, though, is the chemistry between Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. They are perfect together, and I cannot deny this. I just wanted to see these two in a movie where the story and the characters were elevated to something more dramatic and meaningful. And Bad Boys for Life granted my wish tenfold. This is one of the best sequels I have ever seen, and the best action film of 2020, as far as I'm concerned. I have never loved these two characters more. A big problem I had with the last two movies was that the villains were absolute shit and completely unmemorable, but this film smartly and expertly ties the villains into the backstory of these two characters. It was actually more emotional investment this time around. The villains were awesome, and I was genuinely impressed with the great writing on display. The emotional moments really hit hard, and it was a great idea to show these two characters, especially Mike, dealing with their own mortality in different ways. The film is beautifully directed, superbly acted. Smith and Lawrence have never been funnier as a duo, and I can't wait for the fourth film. As long as they keep the same writers and directors, I think the future of this franchise is looking pretty bright. Coming at number 3 for me is The Way Back. This was the last film I managed to see in theaters before the pandemic hit, and I have to admit, I'm glad this was the last instead of that film that shall not be named. This was a very interesting depiction of alcoholism, the effects it has on one's life, and the effects it has on the people around the alcoholic. There are moments in this film that will simply bring you to tears if you've ever known anyone like this. I've dated an alcoholic before. I've known many in my life, so seeing the main character go through this struggle, I can tell you, they depicted it accurately. Like, this feels very genuine and real. Ben Affleck's performance as a drunk trying to rebuild his life as a basketball coach was absolutely brilliant. I could go as far as to say that he's never been better in any film. If you know anything about Ben Affleck's history and his struggles with alcoholism, you realize just how real this performance was for him. If you didn't get a chance to see this before the pandemic hit, I highly recommend it. Now, before we get into my top 2 here, in regards to these 2 films, I went back and forth on them many times. Both of these were just constantly competing in my head for the top spot on this list. But I realized that there is a difference between what I consider the best film of the year and what is actually my favorite film of the year. And ultimately, my favorite film of the year had to win out for number 1. So, at number 2 is The King of Staten Island. Now, for the record, I never really was the biggest Pete Davidson fan. I mean, I thought he had some funny skits on SNL. He's really not a bad actor, but he never really stood out to me as a particularly great actor. That was until I saw this film and realized just how wrong I was about him. He's fucking phenomenal in this. The character he plays is a guy just trying to figure out his place in life and just kind of treating people like an asshole. But it's seeing him grow out of that and trying to do something with his life that really makes the story great. Now, Pete Davidson, he plays a character whose father was a firefighter who died putting out a fire. Pete Davidson's father in real life was a first responder who died on 9/11. So you can tell this was obviously a very personal story for Pete Davidson. And believe me, that shows on the screen. His chemistry with the always hilarious Bill Burr is wonderful. I loved seeing these two interact off each other, whether they were just screaming at each other, fighting each other, or just shooting the shit at the bar. This film is dramatic, it's funny, it's endearing, and it's Judd Apatow's best film in years. The last film I saw from Judd Apatow was This Is 40, and I really did not like that film at all. So it was really great seeing him return to form with this. The film is beautifully written, beautifully directed. I've watched it several times since buying it on VOD, and I can't wait to watch it several more times. If you haven't seen King of Staten Island, you're doing yourself a disservice. And coming in at number 1 for me, and many people will think I'm nuts, but please hear me out, is Bill and Ted Face the Music. Now, just to clarify again, I think The King of Staten Island is still the best film that came out this past year. But this one, Bill and Ted Face the Music, is by far my favorite. Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves fit back into these roles like a glove, and their back and forth has never been better in my opinion. Samara Weaving and Bridget Lundy Payne were perfect as their daughters. These two are exactly how I would picture 2 kids raised by Bill and Ted. The humor is excellent, the emotional moments all hit for me, and it's always great to see William Sadler play Death. He's just amazing. But here's why this is really my favorite film this year. In a year like 2020, Bill and Ted Face the Music was simply the film we needed. A movie about 2 endearing knuckleheads and their daughters mending relationships, conveying messages about being excellent to each other, and uniting the world. A movie that, at the end of the day, just does everything in its power to make you feel optimistic for the future. In a world that has literally been on fire for the last year, optimism is really what we needed, and I don't think that I'm alone in thinking this. Because of this, no other film made me feel as good this year, and that's what your favorite film of the year should be. The one that had the most profound effect on you. The one that hit you in ways you weren't really expecting it to. Yes, the movie Onward also hit me in unexpected ways, but let's be perfectly honest here, that movie, it just makes me sad. It does. It makes me sad. This movie makes me happy and optimistic. And to think all I wanted, really, was a great Bill and Ted sequel. I got that, but I got a lot more out of it than I wasn't expecting. There's a scene in this film where Ted tells Bill that he's tired of fighting for their band and maybe it's time to pack it in. But they still manage to overcome all this and finally play the song that unites the world. In my opinion, Bill and Ted, as their middle-aged selves, have never been more relatable. I think everyone, when they reach a certain point in life, just says, I'm tired. I can't do this shit anymore. But it's how we overcome these problems that really brings out the best in us. Like, I lost my job this year. It was a good job. It meant a great deal to me. I loved it. I loved being a teacher. And it was taken from me for absolutely no reason at all. Just, yeah, you're let go, goodbye. Literally a minute and a half Skype call. Yeah, you're done, goodbye. So about a month of chronic depression later, I had to face the music and realize that I can't sit here sulking about this shit forever. I now have a new job. Currently, am I where I want to be in life? No, not at all, not even close. But movies like Bill and Ted Face the Music give me hope that I will be. So to all of you out there, be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.